To all the nations, salutations. So he watches somebody from heaven touch his mind's eye. He watches somebody from heaven touch his mind's eye. She watches somebody from heaven touch her mind's eye. It watches somebody from heaven touch its mind's eye. I mentioned God is off in the distance somewhere. God is very busy. God is a very troubled heart, because God has a lot of work cut out for himself and for heaven. He's writing Revelations. He's looking onto the world and clearly onto all nations. Despite all the other things that God must be busy doing alternatively, aside from simply just writing a book of Revelations. Clearly the guy has a lot of things happening. When things pertain to heaven. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. The guy clearly has a lot going on as time pertains to matters affecting heaven. Well, what do we know? We know that maybe we have a moment. Maybe we doesn't have a moment. Maybe we does. What do we know? We know clearly when it comes to heaven, a great many things to look at, to remember. Colossal. We know that the things that pertain to heaven clearly matter to God. Do we? Do we know this? We know that the matters of heaven pertain to ourselves. Do we? Do we know this? Imagine them up in heaven, looking after us. worried about heaven. Looking, gazing, wondering, maybe hoping to know. Does anybody know that heaven means something to them? And why? Does anybody know these things? What do we know? We know that there are there's clearly the work of God, the work of the Lord's, the work of heaven, and maybe the work of life, maybe the work of time. That's like 5. Well, there's the work of these things. And the work of these things, clearly, maybe just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, simply explains to know something. Well, God clearly worked a lot. And heaven clearly worked a lot. There are clearly a lot of questions. Maybe we know this. What do we know? To know, there was a lot of work. To know, there was a lot of memory. To know, clearly, people and things in heaven, and maybe even God, had to do a thing or two, had to touch a thing or two, had to speak once or twice, had to open something, had to change something, had to make something, had to love something, had to see something. But they had to know. They had to know, they had to know, they had to know. And each and every time they had to know, did they have a moment to look back? Was anybody forcing them to look back and say, well, the only way we know is because all this work was done. We know something. The only way we know is all this work was done. What it means to have a moment to think about it, to care about it, to even have a place for it. You know, salutations. What is our place? What do we know with a place? What are we leaving with a place? My goodness, God has a lot of work to do writing Revelations. To have a moment. Probably can't imagine how uncomfortable it is for God to know that you need a moment and all the things that God is going to have to do while you have it. What a thing to know. What a thing for God to believe in. Can you imagine it? God is going to be wherever God is, and time is going to be happening however time is happening, and maybe somebody, maybe all the nations, are going to have a moment. Maybe they aren't going to have a moment, but God is going to believe they could have a moment. And all the work God is going to have to do because they have that moment. So I want to pause there too. What do we know? We know. Maybe it's wise. Before we go traipsing and peddling and meddling about all of the preciousness and the stationery. You know, a lot of my mind is stationary. The places I go, the things I see, the ways I feel about the road or the land or the people or the buildings or the things that I'm learning or reading or talking about. Stationery kind of has a place with me. Maybe it has a place with you. Maybe everybody might feel that stationery has a place. Why is the stationery getting off the ground? Okay? Why is it getting off the ground? Here we have a moment. I have a moment. And clearly somewhere in time, I is having a moment to think about God and the preciousness of writing Revelations. Maybe you have a moment too. Hard to know. Maybe it'd be wise. God could believe we'd have a moment To care about what to do. What are we? Where have we came? We're having a moment. What does it mean? Well, is it wise to be so forthright when we might know, we might even respect or care that maybe God is tremendously busy and already knew for us to have a moment becoming at quite an expense to the almighty forces anywhere. 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 Might be wise. Before I lift the stationery off the ground, that I recognize maybe it's you, maybe it's I, maybe it's people, maybe it's some, many, or loads, or lots, or several. I should probably realize there's probably a lot happening that I'm not the best equipped to care about from anywhere, as anybody. But I may have a moment to think. I may have a moment to appreciate. I may have a moment to look. Maybe I'll ascend before the stationery does. Maybe you will too. Maybe all of us will ascend today. Someplace. So while God's tremendously busy, while you have a moment, and you're picturing yourself ascending without stationery, God is going to believe in you. God is going to believe in the work He is doing for you to have that. For you to feel or see or even remember. It might be wise before the stationery gets off the ground that we maybe get ourselves thinking. Getting ourselves when we don't know all that is, and we're ascending, is it truly possible there's a label created that these moments are a reality, or is it more possible that these moments are a relationship? Maybe we know writing Revelations, he is very busy. Very, 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 very busy. And has anyone taken the time to feel like they're comfortable or confident swallowing the word relationship? Amen? Anyone comfortable or confident spending time having learned they're comfortable and confident swallowing they have a relationship? Maybe we're not reminded of the work by God to swallow relationship. Maybe we're not reminded of what God's belief in us might ever mean for relationship. Maybe we've taken the time to be comfortable and confident with relationship. Because we did the work. I did work on myself. I caused myself to be comfortable and confident with the word relationship. Maybe I doesn't believe God had anything to do with it. Anywhere, anytime. Then God is going to clearly consider this, and then he's got to go off and write Revelations. Might put a damper on your ascension in time, or feel like it could, or seem as though the good Lord's work isn't clinching in places that we need, that we care about, that we even know about. What do we know? Well, we know to faith or believe or no, God is very busy writing Revelations. To faith or believe or know it. What do we know? Well, it's most highly probable or likely. Somewhere in time, someone, or a lot of them, have spent quite a deal of time fixating on their relationship to the concept, the idea, the name, the word, and the sound, and the souls and the ideas of God and heaven and lifetimes. We know that someone, or a lot of them, spent a great deal of time fixating on God. Great deal of time. Maybe we know that. If we know God is busy writing Revelations, clearly someone or a lot of them have spent a great deal of time fixating on God. And maybe on our path of thinking about this, maybe on our path of living or believing, ascension, sort of a expression, but it maybe isn't clear that there's much more to know. Maybe isn't. Remember, God's very busy. God has belief to deal with. Belief in us. Belief in the world. Belief in time. Belief in the work and the things that God does that are godly. And heaven's place in all this. And life's place in all this. Maybe we know that time is moving. Maybe not all things in time, especially the stationary, are probably taking a moment to appreciate God or ascension or revelations. The stationary probably isn't doing very much of this. Maybe we know this. Maybe there's things to see. Maybe there's things to recognize. Maybe there's lofty problems and solutions about other things in time or other stationary, sedentary relationships, you know, the harder you look when the stationary isn't, who knows what you'll see? Who knows what it'll feel like? Who knows how important the time? Who knows what you'll awaken to? Huh? Amen? Who knows? What does it mean? Look, I have a life. You have a life. I'm not interested in that right now. I want to know what it means that anybody can spend time with any piece of stationery, not to mention something that heaven has created, or God has created, or life has created. What does it mean to be able to spend time with stationery and sense or know yourself? And the love in you is growing. Yourself. And the time you're spending, you aren't sitting there absorbing bruja. You aren't sitting there, standing there, leaning there, wondering there, entertaining there, enjoying there, enshrining there. You aren't doing anything with a piece of stationery that is causing you to feel like your love is failing. What does it mean when stationery relates to faith? What does it mean that a mind and some eyes, a person, a spirit, a soul, what does it mean when they can spend a bit of time with any piece of stationery in a faithful relationship? I think and believe that anybody will tell you, well, that might mean a lot. Might be quite a thing to think about. Think about speaking faithfully. Think about relativity of faithful nature. Think about normal, because all of our time isn't a chaos because we've agreed on something, or we've come to places in our lives, in our minds, where we're comfortable and confident, where there's ideas, where there's memories, where there's spirits, where there's holiness, where there's grace, where there's growth, where there's development, where there's necessity, where there's nations. We're comfortable and confident wherever these ideas, whatever they are happening. Why are we comfortable and confident? We define our relationship to the ideas. You think about every nook and cranny of record that is helping any faith of any type to escalate or climb or fraction or depend or know or dedicate or advise every nook and cranny. Every nook and cranny. It'd be much different if coming to become confident and comfortable with our relationships to faithful stationery. They're colossal energies. They're colossal components of place and time and the ongoings of any moment to moment, time by time, back pedal to back pedal, so forth, you name it. But no one in the world, no one on the world, no one anywhere said to themselves, I am going to live God's life today. Think about writing revelations about the planet and talk about ascension so that the guy that removed the fraud from heaven could live better. No one woke up this morning and said, I am going to make sure that guy from heaven can live better. And say these things to you. And yet, none of those people are probably being that wise about stationery or what to do when the world might be caring about something tremendous. See, a lot of minds, a lot of lives. What separates them from stationery? Well, it's quite a lofty question, especially when God's busy writing revelations. Because maybe there isn't a lot separating these lives from stationery, because maybe there isn't any genuine integrity in any of these people to care about stationery staying as stationery, or lives remaining living. Now, I'm sure everybody wants lives to remain living. When you get a lot of minds together, and it isn't really clear what we know, maybe isn't very clear what differentiates stationery from the living. It's quite a lofty question. So maybe we're reminded how busy God must be writing revelations. What do we know? God's path to care about revelation isn't forever distant from our path to learn and live, to care and love, to feel or benefit or know things. God's path isn't forever distant from our lives. And, if God is going to care so much about stationery and faith and revelations, and probably isn't totally convinced why he should believe in anyone, what do you think? Might not be impossible to envision our God looking down on our world and thinking, You know, somewhere I knew I could be writing Revelations today, because I am writing Revelations today. And as I do, well, it's real clear who isn't waiting for me. It's maybe real clear who isn't comfortable swallowing. Because clearly, the living and the heavenly and the goddish, well, people make things for reasons. People do things for reasons. You might say that the way our world feels and looks relates to a lot of reasoning, and the way our stationery feels and looks relates to a lot of reasoning as well. There's clearly a lot of reasoning that well, if a mind isn't equipped to think, well, the chances that a mind is going to look at a piece of stationery and realize that stationery isn't destroying their life. Well, if they can't think, they're probably not going to be casting a very thorough opinion about that stationery wasn't destroying my life. And so what does God see? Well, the things we faith and the things we take time to develop or think or care about, stationery, memories, things that have been dubbed significant, relevant, good. What does God see? Well, if stationery is going to relate to faith very heavily or highly or specifically or in ways that God knows very, 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 very delicately and passionately and factually, clearly. If a piece of stationery is going to relate to faith, well, clearly, what thinks the stationery isn't destructive is clearly very important to God. It's different than what simply props the stationery, or what simply grows with the stationery, or what simply looks at the stationery. If you can't think to know a faithful relationship relates to stationery and it isn't destroying your life, if you can't think about it, well, God is clearly going to know your attitude about it differently than if you were thinking about it. What I'm saying is, it isn't the differences that are on their way to really creating the problems for life and God and heaven, probably. It isn't the differences that are going to be creating the immovable obstacles. It's going to be the ways we're boldly not going where no one hasn't gone ever before. And there's so many limits of time and potentiality and reality and experience. You know, clearly God is writing Revelations because he loves us and for our safety and for our habitat and for our lives and for our souls and for our minds. But God is clearly also writing Revelation because there's an awful lot of limits. And there's an awful lot of ways to know and care about things. And it maybe isn't easy to come right out and say, you know, God isn't the one that should ever be expected, ever, to rest faith on people, to care about the work God is doing on their behalf. It's very difficult for God to come out and ever say that. Because it's not just God that depends on the faith. People depend on the faith. Life depends on the faith. All things together depend on the faith. Whatever the faith might be. So, moving backwards here, what does it mean when I can look at the energy in my life and look at it and know comfortably that energy, there is a light in that energy? What does it mean? See, it's not always the world. It's not always the nations. It's not always the reality that is heavy enough to care. How good would it be for you to ask yourself that question about stationery today? If you could ask yourself, this stationery I'm looking at, there's a light in it, and you'd be comfortable with it. What does that mean to your life? Well, if we take all the nations away, and we take all the product away, and we take all the reality away, what do we have? We have you, in time. Well, you need protection, and you need support that cares about your comfort. You need somebody, maybe it's God. God cares. You're thinking. You're caring. It isn't just you. It isn't just God. It isn't just stationery. It's a whole slew of things. You're looking at something complicated, and you're telling yourself, you know there's a light in it. What does it mean? Well, you might not ever know what it means if God wasn't there, mightier than the nations, mightier than the realities, and mightier than the products. You might not ever know what it means to you. And so what you realize is, whoever it doesn't mean anything to isn't likely ever going to be asking pertinent questions or casting pertinent opinions about the destructiveness of faith. See, we require God to be mightier than our nations. All of them. We require God to care of the things we might need. That's one way to look at it. Anyway, there's a lot of limits in knowing, in working, in doing, in creating, in having, in knowing, in holding, in continuing. So many things. Endless, countless. Out of the equation. They aren't endless. We've figured out an end. We've figured out a separation point. We've figured out, as we might be ascending in our respects of stationery, okay? There's maybe an end point that of all the things we ask in and of God, and ask in and of ourselves, and ask in and of light, and ask in and of time, and ask in and of the planet, and ask in and of others, and ask in and of stationary, it isn't that far-fetched to see we've clearly reached an end point, or a limit, or a maxim, not of life, not of possibility, not of truth, but of time and of respect. You know, if I'm a piece of stationery, what's going to jump up and speak for me and say, you know what, people? I really respect you guys have lives and all. I really respect you gotta, look at me and handle me and care about me a little bit, not a lot, just however much is fun for you. But guess what? I'm a piece of stationery, darn it. And you know what? Somebody better care more than you do about me, because I'm stationary. Okay? When's the last time the world got together and cared about stationery? Probably today, because they're probably all too busy caring about it without an opinion of destruction, because there's no faith involved, because we probably don't even exist to them. They could just forget that God is writing revelations. Okay? And so you might see a light in that too. You might see it's difficult to differentiate people from stationery sometimes. You might see it's difficult being God sometimes. You might see it's difficult to be people coming to realize stationery and faith and comfortable swallowing. No. These aren't tricks of space, clearly. These are things that are good for what you might possibly become, for what you might possibly want in your life, for what you might possibly need because others need you to have it, and you're going to need others to have it. Maybe everybody needs everybody to have it. Something like this. There's clearly a lot of needs and a lot of limits and a lot of things to consider when anybody's ascending without the stationery. Okay? Maybe the problem is decision. God's writing revelations. Clearly, if everybody's just sitting back waiting for God to do something, or waiting for heaven to do something, well, the decision, well, that really might stand out, mightn't it? It really might be one of those memories of, well, we took a look at this, we took a look at that, and then we took a look at what God had to say, and then the faith is no longer ascending. The faith is no longer wanting of a soul. The faith is no longer asking, can I gain something spiritually? When it's a time where God and faith and the world are near to together about something, can I gain something spiritually? Well, the ascension is going to cease by the time God renders a decision, or heaven decides something overtly. So, what does it mean to be comfortable and confident to swallow? And what does it mean to feel like everybody asks this of everybody sometimes? What does it mean? And would you ask it? Would you look in the mirror and ask yourself it? Would you look at somebody else and ask it? What does it mean when everybody needs everybody to do something? You know, it's hard for me to look back at my life and recollect anybody ever saying that to me. I honestly, I'm having a hard time looking at my life and saying, you know, that person came up and said, everybody needs everybody to do this. But would you ask it? Would you open your mouth for your own eyes, for your own time, yourself? What does it mean when everybody needs everybody? You know, you don't know if you do or don't want to live in a world where you haven't seen the world care about that. Why do you want to live in a world everybody needs everybody, but you've never seen it? You've never witnessed it. You've never lived it while ascending without stationary. What does it mean? I'll tell you what it means. When it happens, somebody is going to have a very solid answer that, you know, somewhere somebody's probably going to have an answer and they say, it's a good answer. God is very busy. I know it. Clearly the world is preoccupied with what have you. No accident about it. No accident about it. You could be living today, asking these questions, hearing these questions. Part of the world, part of life, part of yourself, part of yourself. What does it mean? No idea how many blind faiths and halfway maneuvers and uncertainties and people that you'd look at and you'd wonder how they get by day to day. But despite the way they look, are doing things and caring about things that would baffle your mind because of the faiths they have. Because somewhere, maybe it's you. You hear me saying these things about the world, about time, about recollection and a good answer. Maybe you realize you aren't taking that everywhere you want it to go. You aren't pushing it through all the entireties of everything and making it just so the way you want it all to be. But maybe somewhere in your mind you realize that a good answer might be making all the difference in all the places of the universe. Because maybe a world, well, maybe we were very, very, very diligent in caring about our stationery that relates to faith. Amen? Maybe we're a world that cared very diligently about our stationery relating to faith. Amen? You might even realize when you hear me saying these things, maybe that world isn't without you. Maybe that world isn't going anywhere truly without you. What that might mean, because you stayed in touch with faith, because you gained in spirit time after time, devotedly, diligently, or with some degree of affection. You know, it's one thing to create something. It's another thing to know in creation. It's another thing to live beside it. Amen? We think about the planet and stationary. I mean, maybe there's too many things. Maybe there's too many people that know too many things. Maybe they know too many good things about too many things, and there's just so much knowing. Clearly, the more comfortable we are swallowing. What does it mean? Maybe the lighter our destinies could be. And I live with something created. It's different than just creating it. I'm living with it. When I live with it, well, if the world's taking it and putting it somewhere without me, and I'm the one living with it, well then clearly there's a major error in faithful stationary harmony in all time. Because clearly swallowing comfortably has something very, very, very unique in store. Should our faith in the Lord prove true, should our God prove our destiny divine, every choice about the things you're going to live and not live with, they're all impacted by what the destiny mightn't otherwise become if God wasn't in the picture, if God wasn't diligently writing revelations, if these facts about stationery and faith weren't out of a state of paralysis. No mind that thinks in time about the development of this world is going to be suggesting that our faiths are in a paralysis, that our stationery is in a paralysis, that our lives are in a paralysis. Comfortable swallowing as we learn, or as we realize, or as we recognize as it isn't clear what God's writing in Revelations, and as it isn't clear what heaven has to say about all that, and it isn't really clear that the highest, mightiest, of precious livelihoods is running the risk of believing in anybody the world over. Anybody. And what we doesn't have to live with. I'm not talking about, you can decide what you live with because it's possible, whatever the reason, it's possible for you to define what you live with, and that's the way you look at life. I don't know how many people have died that carried a faith in God but if stationery has a heartbeat, and somehow the world finds a heartbeat also, then with God, they maybe aren't dead. And if that means all those that have died might not truly be dead because of God, and God clearly works a lot with stationery. Well, the stationery God works with, well, maybe it'd be good news for God to know, you know what? I'm working with stationery, and my stationery, well, the holes that could have been in it aren't. There's a heart there. Maybe there's billions. There's time there. Maybe there's infinity. I can't imagine what it would be like for God to work on Sunday as I ascend without stationery faithfully. As I ascend without stationery faithfully. Can't imagine what it must be like for God, or might be like for God, or could be like for God. But what do we know? We know that God has thought about these things before. We know that God has cared about these things before. We know that God has seen in people, in nations, in faith, and stationery before. God has been around the block, so to speak. We know this. What do I like? I'll tell you what I like. I like that you could be comfortable swallowing and know that you're living. And love yourself and love the world. Just because. It's your world, it's your home. And that's what it needs. It needs your love. As do you need love. I like that. I like that the more respectful we could be about the light we faith in stationery. You know what I like? If we're starting our own book titled Outgrowing Faith, well, guess what? If God isn't getting left behind, and neither is the stationery, then what I like is when you know that you can love and you need love, and that's possible in your life and time, and it's possible with and through and via God, I like that book about outgrowing faith isn't being written. That's what I like. I like that the more you realize, no matter where you are today, you're in God's hands. We're all in God's hands. I like that the book of growing beyond faith isn't being written. I like it because there's so many people that haven't ever had this experience before, that haven't ever seen themselves caring about something that God cares about before. I like that. Life's an adventure that way. I haven't called upon God to take your life away, your livelihood, your opportunity to think or feel or come to know maybe even just a little bit more about your relationship to living and your faith and God and all things. I like that the book about growing beyond faith isn't being written today. I like that a lot, especially whenever I have to sit here and write revelations for the sake of the entire planet and the universe. I like that you could care about that. I like that it's possible to be cared about, but it isn't easy to reconcile. The reality isn't even really the factor of the label. It's your faith. It's your spirit. It's your mind's eye. It's bigger in you than the world is in you. That's what I like. I like that it's possible for you to come to realize your mind's eye with faith is bigger than what the world's eye is for you. Always. I like that a lot. I like the world. I like the world's eyes. I hope to hear and look and care about the world's eyes when I can, how I can, if I can. But I like that your faith in your mind's eye, you can come to realize, could in fact be bigger than the world's eye. I do like that. I'm talking about how you feel about possibility. I know you're not going out and writing the next great American novel today. I know you're not going out and just completely marching around time and saying what's what when it comes to all stationary or all faith or all time. I know you're not doing this. I'm talking about possibility in your mind's eye. Whenever you look at yourself and you say, you know, I've been looking at faith in the world for quite some time, and today is clearly a different experience in circumspection than a lot of experiences that I've had or that time has actually afforded anybody in time. It's quite a time. It's quite a conversation. But I know these things. I know you're not doing that. And as I know you're not doing that, the stationary breathes. What good is a piece of stationery that carries faith if there's no one that breathes the knowing of what can't be, what simply cannot be? Talking about possibility, that if everybody needs everybody, when your mind's eye is the subject and you're thinking about possibility, how easy is it for you to point the finger at everybody and say, I wasn't safe enough to think about possibility. Ergo, when I thought about possibility, it created a lot of problems for the world and for everybody. Why isn't that the case today? Why could anybody of the world care about what I'm saying? Well, it would be possible because faith in God in heaven. It would be possible because I could know. You aren't off writing the next great American novel about outgrowing faith today. I know you aren't. And so you're thinking about possibility. And when you think about possibility, why isn't it ending the world? Well, it's not ending the world because I saw it fit that it wouldn't end the world. And I saw it, maybe I saw it with everybody's eyes. Maybe everybody saw it and told me about it. One way or the other, there's an expressible amount of conditions and safeties and knowings and limits with and within the world. And as you can think about possibility, it was possible for me to think about this today. That's quite a complicated riddle. Yes, it is. It is quite a complicated riddle indeed. But I'm telling you what I like. And I'm telling you why I like it. And I'm telling you why you might not be a big old harm to yourself or anybody because you think about it. Because maybe you might believe it. I don't know how common it is for any mind or any eye. When I say God's bigger than nations sometimes, I don't know what happens with all those people all the time. I don't know. Personally, maybe when I say God's bigger than nations, somebody believes it. Maybe when I say it, they can't even hear it because it just can't happen, because they're removing the stationery, because they're a faithless people, because. I don't know what they hear. I don't know what they think. But what I know is, today, you might be thinking about possibility. And you might be thinking about God working on possibility so that your life is possible. I like, by the time you can think about the possibility and God is bigger than all the nations, I like you're safe. And it isn't by accident. I like that you're safe and it isn't ruining God. I like that you're safe and it isn't ruining the world. I like that you're safe and maybe you realize maybe you have time to grow. Maybe you have time to experience or live or learn or grow your spirit. But I know today you isn't writing the book on outgrowing faith, champ. I know he isn't writing it. Now maybe the good that cometh from these types of possibilities, maybe it isn't real clear what types of burdens happen because of all the good, right? Possibilities can be very powerful. Possibilities can be very problematic. Now, I isn't saying that today is powerful or problematic. I didn't say that at all. I'm saying how good the possibility is. It's very hard for the work, the responsibility, and the care factor to assume how much of a burden the good is going to be. Right? I know I care about people. I know I care about this city. I know I care about this planet. I care about this stationery. I care about belief. I care about this. I care about that. I'm a developed individual. I care a lot, okay? I'm all over the place, clearly. But when a good possibility happens, look, I'm not writing the book on outgrowing faith, okay? Maybe that's true. But since I don't know everything there is to know about everything, if there's a good possibility and it's a big energy in my life or world, well, there's clearly going to have to be some level of responsibility about the goodness. I know that. And it's different from God's eyes to a person's eyes to the world's eyes, to a memory, to anything we might ever have to say looking back. See, anything that looks back on these moments, the levity, there's every reason of possibility somebody's going to pick up what they write or what they say about it, and it's going to help them grow faithless, you see. The good in the possibility. What does it mean? When's the last time you or anybody thought about, well, heaven helps to develop heavenly bodies so that goodness is supported both by their bodies and goodness is supported inside their bodies. They are in essence providing the care of goodness. They are in essence transplanting the steps, the walk, the paths, the roads inside themselves. Passages of learning, transmission of wisdom, encouragement, rearing, schooling, education, development, opportunity, and stationery, billboarding, holographics, the like. And then, on and on into dimensions and capabilities and specificities of thought capacity. It's all very, very, very detailed types of despondency, but it's all very critically relevant to a good possibility. Maybe the best good possibility for a world. A good possibility. It might not be real clear what the responsibility is going to be to deal with the good possibility. As I think about it, it isn't simple. It's difficult to know what the responsibility is about a lot of that. So maybe somewhere it's hard to feel so passionate or in a rhapsody about a moment or any particular time or any particular relationship. Who knows how these ideas work their ways into development everywhere. You see, if you're going to be stronger than the nations and the development, and you're going to be stronger than the problems of possibility, my friend, you have to be ready to level logically. You have to compare. You have to compare the estranged in the desponents, in the exponentiate, in the forgetful, and the ignorant, and the extravagant. You have to compare it to something. And those somethings aren't easy to move. They aren't easy to write books about growing beyond faith. No one of this world has ever seen what happens to Atlas when the stationary is in a desponent with the entire world maybe in the distance. No one knows if these times are so important to life and God. Nobody really knows how our love and our lives and our relationships are going to hold in fruitions because of a possibility of respective stationery. Nobody really knows. Maybe we have somewhere, clearly there's been respects of stationery before, but we're in living color today. Has everything to do with heaven, has everything to do with, am I prepared to care about those that have burdened to care? Or am I just starting to sense that my care of those that watch over me is in development, or something that I'm just getting in touch with. Maybe I realize, well, it isn't really easy for anybody to think about how huge the possibility is in all relationships, in all places, in all time. But the possibility that I'm starting an adventure to care about those that look out for me, maybe that's a bit more doable for a lot of people. Maybe that's a bit more realistic for just about anybody. And, you know, when you look at a piece of stationery, after that, who knows how you'll feel? Maybe it isn't for me to say how you'll feel, because maybe nobody knows how you're going to feel because you haven't lived it yet. Right now, you're just hearing me talk about how much God might enjoy or like the idea. Somehow, some way, you realize God's writing Revelations today. Or somewhere near to today. Must be quite something when somebody realizes there's a way for them to care about the forces or the places or the people, or maybe even the stationery, that cares so much about them. Must be something. Must be quite something when somebody could come to realize that. And as I said, maybe it isn't for me to say what a piece of stationery looks like or feels like or is after you've had that moment in your life. I can't tell you what the moment cost. I can't tell you what the opportunity provides. I can't tell you but if I can't tell you that, and I have to love you, and I have to love the world, and I have to do so with faith, well, by golly, if I can't tell you what the stationery is going to be for you, well, then so be it. But it's going to come at a cost. You know what that cost is going to be? That cost is that everybody needs everybody. Well, there's some truth to that. It isn't a far-fetched myth. You know, maybe you're not going to be in heaven. Maybe you're not going to even be God. But maybe you're going to be alive. Going to be alive with the world. I'm not ever going to precisely ask you to take care of this world or yourself with it for the sake of some far-off, distant, we don't know what's happening there. And this is precisely why. Because I can't create respect of anything if I can't depend on heavenly bodies to carry the roads our way, the way we need them to go. Hear me. And so the opportunities to learn, well, they're clearly malappreciated always. But an opportunity to learn isn't a pre-diagnosis of all possibilities. See, some possibilities are fragile and delicate. Some possibilities are glamourable and tangible, and maybe even possibilities that you can feel or sense that you hold in your hands or in your mind, or with a sense of being beside it. Maybe you even live with a possibility. It's different than the opportunity to learn generally, vaguely, sporadically, routinely, de factish. It's different. But it is for these reasons that God, isn't going to be asking people to work to take care of the world simply for the sake of some other distant planet. And I'm not saying that there aren't things that we do here that other planets might somewhere appreciate, or there's things that other planets do that we appreciate because they do it, and we know it, or don't know it. Who knows what we say about that, but as God, I'm not ever going to be asking the world to take care of the world without these possibilities being held very, 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 very highly. Very, 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 maybe quietly. In time. But that's why. Can't do it. Because you, maybe we'd say you require. I can't tell you how to feel. I can't tell you what to experience. Whenever you think, look, I feel changed in faith. I feel changed in time. I feel like something I've seen is different than how I used to feel about it, and it's changing my feelings about faith. It's changing my feelings about time. I can't tell you what to feel or think. Well, there's a cost. If I'm not going to shove it down your head, if I'm not going to force it in your eyes, if I'm not going to pump it into your life, I'm going to let you live. It's got to come at a cost. The cost clearly is that some possibilities are bigger than the nations. See, I know I said God is very busy. Maybe you've come to realize hearts of our civilization clearly very busy as well. Potentials for all the different people and all the different lives and all the things that their heavenly bodies are providing and caring about as they grow, as they develop, as they become living, more so living, eagerly living, excitedly living, knowably living. Well, they're changing. There's clearly a lot of things happening with a lot of hearts. It's clearly a very, 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 very stressful suggestion. Who knows how many people have goals for their development that aren't resting on faith, and they know it. And they aren't going out of their way whatsoever to create the stationery that isn't ever going to fail these possibilities. What about these people? Well, whether they support or they doesn't support you or God or heaven, well, the time for them to think without it being forced on them is being paid for by the costs that heaven is paying. Okay? That's what's paying for it. So if they have a way of living, so maybe a little different than faith somehow, well, there's clearly something to be said or not said about that. But there clearly aren't things that have gone outgrowing faith and time. Every time somebody thought about God and life, they did it in a relationship to us today. 10:10. 10:12. You might realize so many of them would never know what we'd feel or see today. And yet, is there evidence they cared and were cared for by their God? Is there evidence of this? Every time was in a relationship to today. Maybe there's a gentle way to ruminate on the idea, but I'm skeptic about the wisdom of it, because why isn't that wisdom going to be writing a book of outgrowing faith? Okay. All these people didn't believe in God so that all the nations could blast off the planet tomorrow. They didn't do it for that. They did it for their livelihood, and they did it for the fact that survival isn't going to break. That's why they did it. Every single time they did it in a relationship to today. And I'm skeptic of the wisdom of it because, it isn't easy for me to discipline what happens about that fact. It isn't easy for me to discipline what the decibel reality is about those relationships, but outgrowing faith, it's clearly something that is very ingrained in my skepticism, probably forever, when it comes to survival and it comes to time and it comes to possibilities. Look, just because I know every time they cared about God, they did so in a relationship to today, it isn't simple for me to use that piece of information and regulate something and justify something or prudently discipline something. It isn't easy for me to do that. And I clearly knew that very, very, very heavily before we ever came to experience today, before we ever came to actually feel. We're not writing a book about outgrowing faith? No way. Really? It isn't easy for me to cast judgment about the truth of the moment of time, you see. So I'm definitely very skeptic of the wisdom of it. And, maybe the world might say something about power or survival. But, I probably doesn't like any of it. Because what they're not caring about is, I'm so darn skeptic, I'm going to change. Somehow. Maybe my skepticism is never going to change. But me, God, I'm going to change. And I'm going to change in some unscalable, unprovable, very mythical reality that is caring about the world after the time possibility. I'm going to change as God. And I am completely skeptic about the wisdom of it. So let me tell you something. I am definitely not very excited about the prospect of changing at an inflection of all the people of the entire world. See, I'm going to be caring about the entire world today. And I'm going to change moving forward. How open do you think I want to be? Oh, just because they were nations, just because they were them, just because they were this people, that people, or this people, they were ready to contribute to my change as God. I don't think so. I think I'm going to be very skeptic about the wisdom of it, and I think I'm going to be feeling very peculiar about myself changing as time progresses in proportion to the world. I don't know how I'm going to be feeling, but I'm definitely going to be knowing of it. Now, God knows. God knows. So these are realistic, timely sentiments of the world plane. Not to mention any number of logistical planes, not to mention any number of development or creationary planes. This is very realistic. But I almost can't tell you how much the circumstance It's going to be the reasons I was ready. Why was God ready to handle the possibility? That's what it's going to be. Because the universality component of information is, well, the last thing it's doing is making it simple for you to be confident. So why was God ready to handle the possibility? Now, I don't imagine that many around the globe are going to stand up and say they're mature enough to care about that question, or they're aware enough to realize how sensitive of a question it is. But the distance between myself and possibility of faith in time is near to effectually zero. And the distance of certainty of family clearly isn't going to be zero, as anybody ever attempts to talk about why God was ready for the possibility. So, that made a very large amount of work for me in faith, because God is going to have to be alive today, and God is going to have to be writing Revelations, and God is going to have to know things about why God was ready for the possibility, but at the same time, that's different than a book about it. That's different than, talk about it, or learning about it, or assumption about it, or any. It's not a swallow. It's a step. Why was God ready for the possibility? That's not a swallow. It isn't a swallow. Made a great deal of work for me. Because you were going to have to live through the possibility, and God was going to have to write Revelations as you did. And as you did, God was going to have to care about so many things that I've only mentioned some little things about in this discussion, and then was also going to have to be ready somehow for the question, why was God ready to handle the possibility? There's clearly answers, but someone's going to be skeptic about how thorough the answers are. God had to be ready for the possibility because it's what God does. God loves us, and handling possibilities is something God does. That's going to be one answer. But why was God ready for the possibility? Well, is the world equipped with enough stationery that anybody's life might be able to continue tomorrow, caring about living and maybe even caring about faith in God? Well, if the world was equipped with enough of that, that might have something to do with God's readiness to handle the possibility. But I can't imagine anybody believing God has handled the possibility. It's already handled. God didn't have to think about what I said today. God already handled it. God didn't have to care about today happening. God already handled it. I don't think anybody's going to believe that. So why was God ready for the possibility? Well, it's a step. It isn't a swallow. And by my recognition, I can't imagine it being a very I can't imagine there being a lot of sanctity in the byproduct. That's me. Speaking from I just can't imagine it being very honest of a question in the long haul. I think that asking why God was ready for the possibility is, well, I think it's a stab at any method that has ever been depended on to building block or stepping stone or to count or remiss faith. I think that the question is potentially the guiding horizon of the ruin of faith in any stretch of the imagination, despite what anybody has come to recognize about time. You see what I'm saying? It isn't going to be simple for any mind to just feel a time, look at time, and look at survival, and be faithful and blessed and feel good about the ascension. Any mind is going to have difficulty focusing that simply and dissuading themselves from more approaches to the time, or more approaches to the reality, or more ways of labeling relationships. It's going to be a very difficult time for labeling relationships. And it isn't easy for God, or for anybody else for that matter, to look at that and say, well, you did all this work to care about labeling relationships, but was that making you any more prepared to handle the possibility? I mean, probably not. It's quite a thing to let your laundry hang out like that. These are the things God knew. These are the things survival needed to think about. These are the things that, when you think about being born, or you think about going to get an education, or you think about growing your life to be somebody or something in your life, whatever it is, you maybe have a way to know that survival cared about these questions. Okay. There's a lot of thought that has gone into what happens whenever there's labeling likelihoods of dilemmas. What happens whenever dependencies are so fruitious in potentiate? There's clearly been a lot of time spent about these things. And it isn't clear that any of that experience anywhere should be more than a swallow of the time. It isn't clear. Because why are they ready to handle the possibility? Well, if they're not ready for themselves, they're clearly ready for some relationship to me, right? Maybe. Maybe not. It's the point. The work that's been done to care about the time, at no point is it really clear that any of that work is going to be answering the question, why was God ready for the possibility? All that work, it maybe doesn't answer the question. Maybe somebody wants the answer to the question to be self-evident or globally evident. You know, they say, God knew we could be here in faith today as God writes Revelations. Maybe somebody doesn't want to see, well, all these label works and all these affectionato potentiate understandings, they made it possible for God to be ready for it. No, they didn't. How could God be ready for the possibility if God's busy writing Revelations? How could God be ready for the growth in the faith realities if God's busy caring about judgment of the wisdom of it? How could God be doing all these things? Oh, no. Just because you did label work doesn't mean there's any readiness there. I don't see survival being capably handled with a readiness there. Has to be more. But bigger than the nations, at a time for maybe anybody to experience how much a component of stationary the work of God is at any point to all or some or time. Might be quite an eye-opening experience for someone to realize that it is bigger than all the nations. See, can you even ask the question if God's ready reasonably? Like, our world's set up so that you can think and you can go and you can experience and you can grow and you can work on your soul and spirit. I don't know what your world's set up like, man. But readiness is kind of a tough subject on a day like today. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that you can even really ask the question about how God was ready for it. God's busy. God's working on it. God's handling it. God's being God. You're the ones that ain't ready for it. That's maybe an answer also. Crazy. The patience never asks the question. Clearly, I think the idea of Revelations as a synonym of final judgment is a bit overzealous, but I like the idea that we're treating something finally. I like that idea. Clearly, you know, a lot of somebodies have clearly been waiting a very long time for their opportunity to ascend and feel finally. Anyway, I can't tell you how many possibilities and potentials have shifted and changed, because, well, technically we're now a world that is experiencing faithful deliverance. It's a little bit different of a reality labeledly in context than other things, but if God can be bigger than the nations every so often, and it's contributing to the positivity of well-being and maturity of grace and things, well, I think I might not mind working on that, because learning is clearly very important to me, and I've experienced a life of learning, and the joys and experiences and opportunities that I've had because learning was a pathway of my mind enrichment and my sense of self and my soul, that my sense is that if it's possible for rejuvenation, so to speak, to be a relativity of time, and paths and roads and things. I mean, that has everything to do with the language, man. That has everything to do with the stationery. I mean, there's just all kinds of possibilities that are changing because we're being faithfully delivered in some senses. Now, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and speak about the circumstances or the specifics that that are in place, or every single idea that I've had or every single place that I've thought about. But that's what I'm telling you, is that to make it possible for the world to be faithfully delivered, well, there's quite a lot of things that clearly needed treated with a lot of respect. There's clearly a lot of things that needed preserved and clung to with a lot of respect. And I couldn't tell you how many balances of impossible there ever needed to be or will be. But there's a lot. And they're impacted by your faith. They're impacted by how you grow as an individual or as a family or as a nation even. They're all impacted by development. And, I'm sure everybody's looking for the book that is going to alleviate their concerns about one type of development or another type of development. But all I see is that when it comes to the stationery that nearly everybody has been touched by, those developmental, they're bound to fall short of a quality of responsibility of the entire world. They're bound to fall short of it. They're living their liberty, they're living their righteousness, but it's being paid for by the responsibility of the faith and faithful realities invested in God. Okay. So I think development and stepping, I don't think they're very good for well-being. Truly. When these energies of time and these energies of life are delivering the world faithfully. This isn't a reflection of my feelings about anybody or any nation or any type of development or any type of path or history. This isn't a reflection of that. But as I'm delivering the world through faith today, if you ask me if I have faith in any particular development methodology today, my answer would be a very strong not. No, I don't today. I think that people need time to look at their life. I think people need time to care about care today. That's what I think today. And I can't imagine how much sincerity are they being sincere today? Are they being sincere tomorrow? Oh man. Why would I ever trust that? Why would I ever trust sincerity? Not today. I'm not going to trust sincerity today. God wants to smack the world with the truth that God has been caring for the planet and people for very, very, very bodaciously long amount of time, okay? And I think God just wants to smack the world and say, you need your life, I need mine, and these are things that we have to hash out. And now's the time whenever we're hashing it out, whether you're on board with that or not, because, it's a very difficult time for me to be worried about trust right now. It's a very difficult time for me to be expecting sincerity about anything right now, because there's just very, 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 very long spans of time that I'm probably thinking about when I'm going through Revelations. So, God, loving us, simply knew that these would be a lot of very deep, heavy, real concerns in proportion to where the minds are going, where the stationery is going, where the world's going, where faith is going. Who can do what? What can we be? Why are we good? Why can we feel things? What are we going to accentuate? So swallowing, accentuating, faithful deliverance. Very, very, very crucial components of time, of knowing, and freedom. Very essential components of freedom. So, my trust, when faithful deliverance is occurring on a world, what happens to it? If our faith in God and the world and life is at a very, 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 very sharp consideration, totally, well, a different faith or a different freedom might feel very differently than the world does about the world's faith. Amen? It's 12:08 a.m. on the 13th, and I put the world under God, and I put God beneath God, and I put China beneath it too. And tomorrow has come, and what do you know?
My stationery
isn't a fraud. Thank you all. God bless you. I love you. Have a wonderful ascension. Have a wonderful ascension.